Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mark Anthony's Music Picks. Today is episode 124, and for today's episode, I'm going to be featuring a beloved Canadian label that many of my friends in the Discogs Dub Techno forum have been following for probably the last decade or decade and a half. Today's feature label is Silent Season, and as stated, Silent Season is a Canadian ambient dub, techno, and even sometimes electro, believe it or not, label that was founded by a man named Jamie McHugh in 2007. Jamie is a DJ and a label boss. He's not a producer. So, if I were ever going to start a label, Jamie, or I would be following in the footsteps of Jamie, because I don't think that I really have, the makeup or the wherewithal to actually become a professional producer, but I think I would like to become a label boss one day. So I always admire when I get to watch other people basically start from nothing, create a label, create a concept, and have it blossom into this creation that has fans and dedicated followers, and really does a great job of just making the world a little bit better place to live in. So Silent Season features some of the most interesting artists in the ambient world. I feel like it's drawn in a very wide smattering and array of artists, many of which were already well respected, and it's also been a venue for some artists to break out and launch their careers in, and they've done very well. The pressing quality of Silent Season is always good. I have rarely, if ever, seen any complaints about the quality of the vinyl. I feel like the sleeves are really nice, and when they do venture into colored vinyl, which is pretty often, I feel like they do a very good job with it. I don't see too many people complaining about any sound quality issues. So hat tip to you, Jamie McHugh. Thank you so much for the label. And for you guys, followers of my channel, I'm going to review 5 records today, and I hope you learned something from this. These are right now my favorite top 5 on the label, but because it's such an expansive label, I might circle back to this and do a part 2 at a later point, because there is a ton of material on the label, and even with 5 picks today, there's a lot of artists that I would like to feature that I'm just not going to have time to talk about. The first record that I want to present to you today for the Silent Season is this little oddity. This is the Full Circle EP, and this came out back in 2010, so it's one of the earlier vinyl releases that Silent Season has done. And you can see, if you look closely here, there's some old artist. It looks like, I'm looking at the back to cheat, it's Glenn Campbell is actually the cover that this was originally made from. So all of the records for this, which is the catalog number is SSV01, all of these are made with recycled vinyl covers. So it looks like they did some kind of screen print over top of an otherwise, defunct record that nobody wanted anymore. And I thought that was pretty cool, because I think it's always interesting when everybody's cover is a little bit different. You'll see Giegling does that on some of their techno releases. Like a couple of the Metatron records, I think, have custom sleeves in the same regard, where people hand drew them or did different types of artwork. So I'll say that this is slightly artistic, and that most of the records in this batch of 200, it's limited to 200, are going to look different, and it kind of makes them their own little techno snowflakes. And speaking of genres, the track that I like on here is the Moleo. Moleo is Samuel Van Dyck, and I would say in this rendition here, he did a track called Anecdote, which, if you're reading it very quickly, you might mistake it for the word anecdote, but it's like anecdote with the T and the D sort of inverted. And here Moleo did an electro take, and this is, as far as I know, the only electro track that appears on the label. I might have missed some others, but I think this is the one, and I really like this track. It is featured on what is ultimately a various artists release here. There is an Iori track on here that is pure heavy hard techno, like you would expect from Iori, and I would say that comes in close second. But for me, the Moleo track it's really interesting. I love the double clutch kick drums in it, and it has an electro snare, right? So you get the minor key synth that sounds like something that Jeff Mills wrote. And like I said, a double clutch kind of intense pumping, pounding kick drum that sounds like the second track in the second track in the Techno Viking episode. I couldn't think of his name. The Techno Viking, right? Where you see him walking down the street in Germany, and he starts out with his first track, and he's doing all of his rave moves. And when the second track kicks in, that's what the bass line in here reminds me of. So bring this full circle. I hope you guys enjoy this, and check this out. This is one of Moleo's most interesting releases ever, in my opinion. Now moving up to 2016, another artist that has 3 different albums on Silent Season is Segue, and I think that's how his name is pronounced. It's Segue, and I'm pronouncing it like, you know, the Segway, like nerdy people like to ride around on. Remember Segways were going to be a thing like 10 years ago, and they never really caught on. But I think that's how he pronounces his name. Segue is Jordan, I can't remember his last name, Jordan Sauer, I think, Sauer. And he's a Canadian artist, so he, you know, that might be how he got in touch with Jamie McHugh to become part of the label. And this is his album, Over the Mountains, that was released on Silent Season as a double fold, or a double gatefold album in 2016. And one of the reasons that I featured this, or decided to feature this for the episode, is I love how this opens up and how this looks. I'm absolutely enamored with this cover art. It's got a golden tinge to it, and the music sort of accompanies the vibe that you would get from this. Like, if I look at this cover, I would think that this is going to be a very settled in, slightly uplifting album, and the vibe of the music does match that. In general, this is a very happy, pleasant album. There are some artists on the Silent Season label that go a little bit darker and work with minor keys, but here Segue stayed bright. And my favorite track on here is the B2. It's called Exposure. And one of the things that I love about Segue is, although his music is primarily beat-driven ambient music, it's almost like there's no limit to the creativity and the sounds that he's able to pull together, you know, to create a cohesive album. Some ambient albums, when you listen to them, it's like maybe you get 8 or 9 tracks, and you could tell they're almost like slight variations of each other. But Segue Records, man, it's like when the track switches from one to the next, you really never know what you're gonna get there. And the track Exposure, I picked that out of the album. It was a tough pick, but I love the choice of almost like peculiar synths in there. There's 2 or 3 synths working together, and they all have relatively slow attacks on them. So it's just got this kind of like lazy, hazy vibe. There's atmospherics of like field recordings of birds chirping, and some percussion in the background that's just like an odd but interesting combination, and I really enjoy how it came together. moving up to 2017, I talked about Silent Season having artists break out on their label and being a venue for artists to break out. Here's one of their biggest breakouts ever, and one of my probably top 3 favorites on the entire label. This is Wanderwell's first album and their first release ever, at least in a physical format that I'm aware of. Wanderwell is a duo from the Netherlands, and they have really drawn in a following that I think launched from this. I mean, when you initially sample this, when I sampled it for the first time, it was almost like I loved it just from hearing the sound bites. And as I've listened to it more over the years, I really appreciate the depth of the production in here. If you look at the cover, it's kind of got this haunted forest vibe, like something like a gas record is what you would think that this would sound like. And it's not too far away from a gas vibe if you really listen to it. You got this monster here on the cover. I don't know what he's doing. He looks like he's wandering through the forest, but if I had to guess, he's probably looking for a friend. He looks a little lonely. I like the swamp green clear vinyl here, which by the way sounds absolutely pristine. And my choice of track on here, I'm cheating a little bit, was the Lured by an Unseen Presence. When I talked about Silent Season being somewhat dub techno and ambient fusion, I think this is a great example of that. Lured by an Unseen Presence has dub techno-ish elements and ambient elements. And getting back to that gas theme, if you listen to this with a subwoofer and you have it turned up, there's an ominous kick drum that hits in the background of that just really hits hard. So if any of you guys listen to my episodes on earbuds, you're gonna kind of miss it. You got to hear this one on speakers. Now moving up to 2019, here's an interesting artist. This artist's name is Toki Fuko. And without looking at his picture, you would think, oh, it's a Japanese artist. And the words Toki Fuko, I don't know what they mean, but that would definitely be a Japanese name. But to my surprise, it's not. It's actually a Russian artist. And Toki Fuko did I guess like a dub influenced album. I think dub influence is the best way to categorize this. And it's a double pack album that came out in 2019, and it's called Spring Ray. And I'll take one of the records out of the sleeve for you to take a look at. Really, really thick plates here. Like if you look at them edge on, real thick, on the heavier side of the spectrum. And with the cover art, like you can see some ferns here. So that you can imagine that I like when the music fits the artistic theme, and it really does here. When I listen to this, I picture almost like a garden of serenity. Now, one of the interesting things about this, it's a double pack with 4 tracks. All 4 tracks are variations of the track called Spring Ray. And just like in other dub records, it's like reshape this and version that. I had a hard time choosing between the original mix and the reshaped version on the D side. But if you wanted to have an idea or a comparison or something that this falls in line with very much, if you guys are fans of the Moritz von Oswald trio, particularly the double pack, quadruple sided album, I think it was called Fetch, is the most comparable to this. And I wouldn't be surprised if you talk to Toki Fuko that maybe he was inspired by the Moritz von Oswald trio, because it's like kick drums like on the 1 or maybe on the 2 and the 4, but it's never all the way through. So it has an oddness to the production of it. And with Toki Fuko, it's there he's a peculiar producer, right? You never really know what you're going to get with one of his records, and he's willing to branch out and go into like weird spaces like dub or pure techno, or I've even heard Toki Fuko records that have elements of what you would consider to be commonplace on a label like Hypnus, where Luigi Tozzi and his friends are working with like didgeridoo, acid type elements. Here, like I said, this one ties most back to the Moritz von Oswald Fetch release. The difference that this does not share with Fetch is that there's no intentional dissonance in this. Like when I listen to Fetch, some of those tracks have like intentionally like the sound of what I would describe as a piano being jammed or launched down a flight of stairs. It's dissonant, and it's meant to create tension, basically like a scary moment in a movie. Toki Fuko has all of the elegant and soft elements of Fetch, but not the dissonance. And for that, I appreciate it. And I think that's why if you look at the reviews on Discogs, you'll see people commenting on how much they enjoy it and how they're willing to come back to it, because I think you put that up against Fetch, and I think Spring Ray wins. And my final pick for you today is by a beloved artist that has a very wide range of production abilities. This artist is ASC, aka James Clement. James is known for, under his ASC alias, I think primarily for producing futuristic drum and bass, different types of jungle. And in more modern times, I've noticed that he's ventured out into deeper, darker techno tracks, sometimes 9, 10, 11 minutes long. ASC also has the ability to make really, really good ambient. And I think it was either 2017 or 2019, ASC released an album that initially only came out on CD on Silent Season, and it was called The Waves. And this is the cover art for it. I mean, one of the best cover art packages that in my whole collection. I love looking at this. It's got like a nice soft texture to it. Yeah, it's not a gatefold, but man, a hell of a cover for a double pack. And Silent Season, I guess due to popular demand, decided to put this out on vinyl in 2021, much to my happiness. So I had latched on, somehow I stumbled onto a track called The Kelp Forest, and there's just something so immersive and beautiful and deep and dark about Kelp Forest. Rarely will you see me glom onto a beatless ambient track. It's just not my jam, but man, as soon as this track begins, you just cannot help but get sucked down into the deep, dark depths of it. And it's almost like you have to become the jellyfish and just quietly pulsate and just work your way through the kelp forest as the track plays, because this track will just take you into places that other records just simply cannot. right, that's all for today's episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed my Silent Season picks. Jamie, thank you so much for putting Kelp Forest out on vinyl. I know that that wasn't your original intention, but you probably gave into a little bit of peer pressure, and we really appreciated it. It turned out great. Guys, feel free to make recommendations down below. If there's any other Silent Season picks that you really love, feel free to comment them down below. I would love to sift through and maybe check out something I missed. Thank you again, Jamie, and take care.